Okay, so welcome back for another deep dive into To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be back, digging into this book. It never gets old.
Right, so last time we left off with, well, things getting pretty intense in Mako with, Atticus taking on Tom Robinson's case.
And the town is definitely not taking it well, are they?
Not at all. It's like everyone's watching, judging. It's definitely not the sleepy little town it used to seem. And of course, we're seeing all of this through Scout's eyes.
Right, always that child's perspective, which makes it even more powerful.
Absolutely. So in chapter 14, things get even more complicated for Scout. She starts picking up on this tension everywhere, like overhearing people gossiping about her family.
Yeah, that moment when she hears someone say, "There's his chillin'," it's like they've become outsiders overnight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's that horrible comment about nobody caring if black people rape up the countryside. Just awful. It's like all this hidden prejudice is bubbling to the surface.
Well, it was always there, right? It's just that Atticus's decision to defend Tom Robinson is forcing everyone to confront it.
And, for Scout, who's still so young, it must be so confusing. She even asks Atticus about the word rape, a word she overheard. I mean, what a tough conversation to have.
But Atticus doesn't shy away from it, does he? He answers her honestly and directly, which I think is so important. He doesn't try to sugarcoat things or pretend the ugliness isn't there.
It's almost like he's trying to prepare her for the harsh realities of the world. And then, on top of all that, we have the drama unfolding back at home. And Alexandra is really clashing with Calpurnia, especially about how Scout should be raised.
Yeah, that scene where Aunt Alexandra forbids Scout from going to Calpurnia's church, it's like a culture clash in miniature.
Right. And Alexandra represents that old Southern way of thinking where appearances and social status are everything. And Calpurnia, well, she represents something much deeper, a kind of love and acceptance that transcends those rigid social boundaries.
And Atticus, once again, finds himself caught in the middle.
But he doesn't hesitate to defend Calpurnia, telling Aunt Alexandra that she's family, that she's essential to their lives. It's a powerful moment.
It really shows us where his priorities lie, doesn't it? He values character and integrity over social standing, and he's not afraid to stand up for what's right, even if it means going against his own family. So we've got racial tensions, family drama, and then of course there's the classic sibling rivalry. Jem and Scout are at each other's throats.
Right. Like, what's up with that?
I think it's partly just them growing up, Jem's trying to be all mature and responsible, which drives Scout crazy.
They used to be such a team, and now it's like they're in different worlds. And then things take a really interesting turn. Remember that scene where Scout hears a noise under her bed? She's convinced it's a snake.
Oh yeah, Lee really builds the suspense there, doesn't she? Like waiting with bated breath to see what's gonna happen.
And then it turns out to be Dill. Can you believe it? He's run away from home and somehow ended up hiding under Scout's bed.
Talk about a plot twist. It's like Lee throws this whole new layer of complexity into the story. Suddenly we have this other kid who's dealing with his own set of problems.
And it's clear that Dill's not just being dramatic. He feels neglected, unwanted by his new family.
And I think it's interesting how his arrival kind of mirrors Boo Radley's situation in a way. They're both outsiders, both searching for a sense of belonging.
It's true. They're both kind of these shadowy figures lurking on the edges of things. But what's interesting is how Atticus reacts to Dill's situation. He's so understanding, He doesn't scold him or send him straight back home. He just lets him stay the night, which is a stark contrast to how Dill's own parents seem to be treating him.
It's that Atticus empathy again. He sees beyond the surface and recognizes that Dill's acting out because he's hurting.
So Dill's settling in, but he's clearly troubled. He starts talking about wanting a baby and how he thinks they come from this man on a foggy island who breathes life into them.
I love that detail. It's so imaginative, so quintessentially Dill, and I think it speaks to his longing for a family, for a place where he feels loved and wanted.
Right. He's craving that connection that he's not getting from his own parents.
And then, as the chapter winds down, Scout asks Dill that incredibly poignant question, why do you reckon Boo Radley's never run off?
And Dill, half asleep, just murmurs, maybe he doesn't have anywhere to run off to.
That line always gets to me. It's so simple, but it connects Dill's yearning for connection to Boo Radley's isolation in this really profound way. They're both trapped, in a sense.
Trapped by their circumstances, by their longing for something more.
And it makes you wonder, how will their stories continue to intersect as the novel unfolds?
So much to think about. This chapter really lays the groundwork for some powerful themes that I'm sure we'll continue to explore as we move forward.
Absolutely. Chapter 14 is a turning point in the story, a moment where everything starts to shift. It's interesting how this chapter kind of changes the way we think about Boo Radley. Like before this, he was just like this creepy figure, this myth.
Yeah, shrouded in all that mystery and fear.
Right. But when Dill shows up with all his own baggage and feeling so alone.
Yeah.
It's like we start to see Boo as a real person.
Yeah, like maybe he's not so different from Dill after all.
Yeah, exactly. And that question Scout asks about why Boo never ran away.
Right.
It really makes you think, is he choosing to hide or is he stuck somehow?
And is it even that different from what Dill's going through?
That's a good point. Dill's free to run around, but he still feels so disconnected.
Yeah, like maybe they're both looking for that same thing.
That sense of belonging, yeah. And it's like Lee's putting these two worlds side by side.
What do you mean?
Well, you've got Dill with all his stories, you know.
Like the man who breathes life into babies.
Right. It's also magical and full of possibility.
Yeah.
But then you have Maycomb.
Yeah, where things aren't so pretty.
Exactly. With all the prejudice and injustice.
Yeah. Like those two worlds are going to collide at some point.
Right. And you can't escape reality forever. Like even with the best imagination.
Right. I think it shows that childhood innocence can only protect you for so long.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do you think Scout, Jem, and Dill are going to deal with all of this?
As they get older.
Yeah.
Well, they're starting to see the cracks in that idealized version of Maycomb.
Oh.
It's like they're in that in-between stage.
Yeah, not quite kids anymore.
Right, but not adults either.
Yeah.
And Lee captures that so well. You know, that awkward stage where you're figuring everything out.
Yeah.
And for them, it's all happening against the backdrop of this huge social upheaval.
Right, with the trial and everything.
It's a lot to handle, even for adults.
So would you say that this chapter is setting the stage for even tougher challenges?
Oh, absolutely. Lee is always dropping hints about what's to come.
Yeah.
I think chapter 14 is like a bridge between those carefree days of childhood and
the harder realities that are coming.
Exactly.
I always think it's amazing how Lee manages to tackle such big issues. Racism, injustice, family.
Yeah, but she does it in a way that never feels preachy.
Or like a lecture.
Yeah, exactly. There's always that touch of humor, even in the dark moments.
When those relatable characters.
Right, is what makes the story so powerful.
Yeah. And in Scout's perspective is so key to all of that.
Definitely. We see everything through her eyes with all her innocence and curiosity.
And it makes those really serious moments even more impactful, like when Atticus defends Calpurnia to Aunt Alexandra.
That's a good point. It's like we're right there in the room with them.
Eavesdropping on this tense conversation.
Yeah. And it tells us so much about Atticus.
About his values.
Right, like how he recognizes Calpurnia's worth as a person.
Not just as a servant.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement, especially given the time period.
Absolutely. It's like he's pushing back against that whole system.
That dehumanizes Black people.
Yeah, and Scout picks up on that too, you know?
Oh, yeah.
She's relieved that Calpurnia isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
It shows how much she loves and depends on Calpurnia.
It's like Calpurnia is this bridge between two worlds.
Between the white and Black communities.
Yeah, and she shows Scout and Jem that there's more to people than just the color of their skin.
Which is such an important lesson in a place like Maycomb.
And then you've got the fight between Jem and Scout.
Which is about so much more than just sibling rivalry.
Right.
It's like they're each trying to figure out who they are.
Jem wants to be grown up, and Scout wants things to stay the same.
Exactly. And those individual struggles mirror the bigger conflicts happening in Maycomb.
Between tradition and progress.
Yeah. It's a lot for them to process.
And then Dill arrives and just throws everything into chaos.
He really does. He's like a little whirlwind.
Yeah, he shakes things up.
And he reminds us that family isn't always about blood ties.
Right, like Atticus is more of a father figure to Dill than his own parents.
Exactly. And it makes you think about what it really means to be a good parent.
Yeah, to provide that emotional support, not just material things.
Right. And that brings us back to that connection between Dill and Boo Radley.
They're both outsiders, searching for a place to belong.
And I wonder if their paths will actually cross at some point.
Ooh, I hope so.
Yeah, it feels like Lee is building towards something.
Like their stories are going to intersect in a big way.
I can't wait to see what happens.
Me neither. It's like every chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird reveals something new.
About the characters, about Maycomb.
About the world, really.
And chapter 14 is such a great example of that.
It's funny, it's dramatic, and it makes you think.
And it leaves you wanting more. It feels like we've just scratched the surface.
I know, right? There's so much to talk about with this chapter.
Every time I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I notice something new.
It's like peeling back layers.
Exactly. You see things in a different light, you know?
I know exactly what you mean.
You have those aha moments.
Yeah, like suddenly everything clicks.
Right.
So as we wrap up this chapter, what are some of the key takeaways?
From chapter 14.
Yeah. What should our listeners keep in mind as we move forward?
Well, I think the relationships between Scout, Jem, and Dill are crucial. They're at that age, you know, where everything's changing.
By that awkward in-between stage.
Exactly. They're not kids anymore.
But not quite adult.
Right. And their whole understanding of the world is shifting.
Yeah, they're starting to see things differently.
And their friendship is so important, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It's like their safe space.
Yeah, where they can be themselves.
And support each other.
Right, through all the ups and downs.
Yeah, even when they're driving each other crazy.
Exactly. That's what siblings do.
But at the end of the day, They have each other's backs.
And we can't forget the historical context.
Right. This is the Jim Crow South.
A time of intense racial segregation and prejudice.
And that backdrop is so important for understanding everything that happens.
It shapes the characters' lives in profound ways.
And it helps us understand the risks Atticus is taking by defending Tom Robinson.
Absolutely. He's challenging the whole system.
And we see those little glimpses of how pervasive racism is.
In the whispers, the stares, the casual comments.
It's like it's woven into the fabric of everyday life.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And Atticus is this shining light, you know.
A beacon of hope.
She shows us that it's possible to stand up for what's right.
Even when it's hard, even when you're facing opposition.
So powerful. So, as we move forward, what's one question you think our listeners should consider?
Let me see.
What will make them think?
I think it would be interesting to see how Scout's view of Boo Radley changes.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. She's clearly fascinated by him.
But also scared.
Right, it's a mix of emotions.
Will she learn to see him as a person, not just a myth?
I guess we'll have to keep reading to find out.
Exactly. That's the beauty of this book.
There's always something new to discover.
And we'll be here to guide you through it.
So, dear listener, as you continue your journey through To Kill a Mockingbird, pay attention to the details.
The small moments, the connections.
They often reveal the most important truth.
And don't be afraid to question your own assumptions.
That's what makes this book so powerful.
It challenges us to think differently.
To see the world through new eyes.
And to strive for a better future.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive into To Kill a Mockingbird.
It's always a pleasure.
Until next time, happy reading, everyone.